Hey there! I hope you are doing well. You can see that I have gotten started over here. I have some onion and garlic sauteing in water. So you'll recall if you are working on the whole plant scenario, you're working on doing less oil in your diet. So these are working towards a translucent state. I have roughly a full bulb of garlic in there and a half a bulb in my single batch. 1 onion in my single batch, 2 onions in my double batch with a 1/4 cup of water and a 1/2 cup of water. So just to give you a sense, we are working from the Flavor Forks Over Knives cookbook on a new recipe today. This is Olla Gitana Spanish chickpea and winter squash soup. So this is brand new for me. Tons of veggies. And just so that I can kind of get everything set, as we are doing this, we need to also pull in our tomato. So if you would like to have a sense of what I do when peeling and mincing garlic, I have a separate video for that. You're welcome to take a look. With my tomato here, I've just taken a knife around the inside to get out that core. And we're going to go ahead. These are going to become a little bit of flavoring in our soup. I'm so excited about that. Now these are large. The recipe calls for large tomatoes, so I went ahead and bought your standard large tomato, just the giant one. People sometimes have preferences, vine ripened, Roma. This recipe just calls for a large. And I wonder, it calls for it to be peeled. I'm not peeling it. All that means is that you might have some skins that come off into your soup. I feel okay with that. Another thing that you might do if you're just like, oh, so much fresh produce to keep on hand and keep track of, you could probably just throw in a can of diced tomatoes, 1 per batch if you wanted to. It would do about the same thing, is my guess. So how you cut your tomato is totally up to you. I'm working for like a long slice and then another long slice, 1/4 turn to get the short diced look going. But this is going into a soup, so you're not going to have to worry about making sure that it's really perfect. If you did want to peel your tomato, you probably could try using a vegetable peeler. Some old school people like to use paring knives. It's really up to you. Maybe if I was like cooking for the queen, maybe I would go ahead and peel my tomatoes, but that just sounds like extra work that I don't want to be a part of, so I'm not going to do it. I'm super excited about this meal, though. It's chock full of vegetables and interesting flavors, so I'm excited to give those a shot. The Spanish aspect, there's saffron in the seasoning, so you get a paprika, salt, pepper, saffron, and then the mint at the end is optional. Amazingly, the grocery store was out of mint, so I'm using a dried leaf mint. But you know, you do what you can. And it's optional, so you could also not have it at all if you had neither on hand. But, you know, every little bit adds something interesting. A fresh mint even would further add some interesting flavor. But also there's pear in here. And they call for an unripe pear. Sadly, that's not my story. I have ripe pears. But again, you do what you can. I think if it was unripe, it would just cook differently. So I'm just going to give those a quick stir and make sure that I don't need any extra water to keep my vegetables from sticking. That's the big key with water saute. You don't want the vegetables to start burning to the bottom. Make sure that this one is doing well. And this recipe is additionally interesting. You're going to thicken this with a breadcrumb. You could also thicken it with a cornmeal, polenta type. But we're going to use a breadcrumb. I have a gluten-free breadcrumb because of my own gluten sensitivities. So my tomato is cut up in there. And now where are we going? We're going for the breadcrumbs. So excited about this. So it's 3 tablespoons per batch. And so that means my double batch will get 6. And you just got to love measuring out tablespoons when you're going to measure out a total of 9 tablespoons. but then I'm sprinkling over the top. And I already knew that that one would run out, so I'm ready to go with my next. So there's my breadcrumbs. It's going to be a half tablespoon of smoked paprika if you have it. I don't have smoked paprika, I just have regular. So I'm going to go ahead and do my half tablespoon here, my full tablespoon there. Look at that, just using all kinds of things up. I'm also going to add in a 1/4 teaspoon of turmeric. So if you have kept track of the How Not to Die cookbook, he often will add turmeric to things just because it's good for you. And this is one of those recipes where I feel like that could easily be the story. So I'm adding that in, even though it's not in the recipe. And they call to add the salt later, but I'm going to go ahead and add a teaspoon of salt and a half teaspoon of salt here, just early on so I don't forget. And some pepper. I usually just sprinkle a little bit in. I don't tend to measure. And then my saffron is 2 strands. So a tiny amount, essentially. I'm going to go with 2 pinches just because that feels like an easier story for me. I get mine in bulk in this little jar. That makes it a little more cost effective. And I'm going to give these a stir. And as that's happening, I'm going to get the next part of this ready. So your tomato is going to cook down pretty far, by the way. It's going to feel like a diced tomato. So again, if you're in a hurry, that would be a really effective way to just do something kind of quick. Just get rid of that dicing of your tomato if you would like. Your breadcrumb is going to get soft as this is all combining. We've added our spices so that they can sort of get that releasing of their flavors going before we add in everything else. And so as we do that, the next thing that's going to happen is we're going to add our squash, pear, chickpeas, and 3 cups of water. So for me, because I'm going to have to cut my pear and my squash, it's not pre-cut, I'm going to add my water, and then I will add my other pieces as they come available to me. I often cook like that. Just throw it in the pot as you go. I think that's true of a lot of people. People are busy. So let me grab some water for these, and you can keep track. So with my larger pot, 3 cups becomes 6. So I'll go ahead and add the 6. Well, that's 4. And then the 2. And then that number is going to be variable. If for some reason you find that yours is not thick enough or too thick, you can always add more vegetables or more water depending on which way that you need to go. So I'm going to go ahead and move that around and allow these to begin to do their cooking and melding of flavors as I continue to add things in. And so because my chickpeas are easy, I can go ahead and add those in. So you're looking for 2 cups or 1 can and then 2 cans. That's so simple. You might as well get it out of the way. And they won't add a whole lot one way or the other in the cooking process, but what they will add is protein and flavor for you. So we'll come back over here, and each of these, so one recipe would get 1 full pear. So I just took the core out of my pears ahead of time for a little faster prep work here. And then I'm just dicing them by taking a long slit followed by a short slit. And I really just love soups because really it's like me, my cutting board, my knife, and a pot. And that is so fast. And then when you're serving, I like the fact that it's all in one place and it goes all in one bowl. That makes me happy. Not that my other meals don't make me happy. I think it all makes me happy. That's the reality. But I do like these days where I know I'm just going to be standing here, a cutting board, a knife, and a pot. And it's really almost meditative to sit there, kind of think through my day. Also, we've talked about this in other videos, that notion of happiness. man, you fill your house with some beautiful smells. You get that sense of accomplishment. Oh my gosh, this meal is done. I've put it together. The rest of my day is about doing other things, but this part is done. I love that. I love that feeling of having accomplished something. So if you're kind of on the fence about do you want to cook or not, do you have the time, for what it's worth, these things make me so happy. It does take some advanced planning, but I often sit down in one of my relaxed moments, and I use this as part of the fun of saying like, ooh, what would I like to eat? It's like creating a restaurant experience in your own home all the time. So for what it's worth, I absolutely love it, and I cannot wait to see what it's like to have this fruit in my soup. I don't know that I've ever made a soup that includes fruit. This is really exciting. So, almost done with the pears, and then we move on to the harder part, the squash, which arguably I should have done first, but I didn't want to because I don't want to. So, here we go. After I talk about happiness, just make sure that those are stirred in well. And then let me just double check on how much our squash needs to be. We are looking for 2 cups per batch. So let me start with my small one. So I also have a video on how to peel and de-seed a squash, which you can look up. This one I've got going for us, at least in part. So let me start with the hollow part because that one's easier. And I will tell you a secret about me. I did not grow up, and don't tell my kids, oh my gosh, I did not grow up eating squash. It wasn't a meal that was served a lot in my home. And that was true of a lot of vegetables, and some of them came easier to me than others. Asparagus came very easy to me as a grown-up, as did beets. But squash has been one that feels a little harder for me to get excited about. So butternut squash is a really nice light squash, I have to say. So if you are trying to get started, it's not as stringy as some of the squashes. And that being said, spaghetti squash actually acts really nicely as a noodle substitute in the winter. It's easy to cook. You cut it in half. I think you de-seed it after you roast it. So you really just cut it in half, turn it upside down in a pan with some water, and bake it at 400 till you could pierce it with a fork. And then you're good to go. You just start eating. Like, you just go like this with a fork, and it turns into all these little fronds, and you can use it in place of noodles. So I don't do that in the summer. I would be more likely to use zucchini noodles in the summer and spaghetti squash in the winter. But this butternut squash is a nice, easy beginner squash. I'm cutting it nice and thin. So normally I don't dice this perfectly, but again, because texture and squash for me is an issue, I'm going to be really diligent about making sure that those get cooked and are part of a bunch of other flavors when I pick up my spoon. Not that I just get a whole bunch of squash and don't know how I feel about it. So those are my secrets. Don't tell my kids because, we're always encouraging them to eat lots of different foods, and I would hate for them to be influenced by my struggle. So it's a secret between you and me. But that's why I'm being so diligent with these squash here. Also, notably, I usually roast my squash, and here we're just throwing it in with a bunch of other flavors. So there's my 2 cups for my single batch. Now it is on to the double batch, which requires 4 cups. And I bought, again, a 4-pound squash. So I anticipate that there will probably be some left over. I don't know how much. But whereas normally I would say the more vegetables, the better, again, because of my own feelings about squash, I'm going to make sure to add the amount. And the extras are coming in with like the onion and the green beans that we're going to add later, but not extra squash, not for me. You certainly could also add extra beans if you wanted to spice it up. Or if you look at it and you say like, oh, I don't know how I'm going to make this into a meal, add rice or throw your soups over potatoes, white or sweet. So this is what I've learned in the whole plant-based cooking, is they beef up the meals by serving something like this, maybe over a rice or potato if it's not going to feel like enough. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at your meals and making a plan for how you're going to fill yourself up and what's going to feel satisfying to you. Even further in that, like brown rice is one way. I'm not the biggest fan of brown rice, but I really like black rice or wild rice. So find a combination of rices. The white rice, it has the least nutritional value. It's also the least substancy in your mouth. Quinoa is another one you could just add to things. It takes like 20 minutes to cook up in a soup, and it just adds all kinds of heartiness. So quinoa is another great one. And in a soup, if you add it in not too excessive of amount, it's just going to blend in with everything else you've got going. It's not going to overpower it. So if you're a little uncertain about like, oh, do I like quinoa or not, soup is a great way to start your quinoa. So we're really close here. I'm getting 4 cups. And again, I bought a really big squash knowing I'm cooking a triple batch all told. And because I'm making them nice and small like this, they're going to cook up maybe 5-6 minutes. They'll be soft is my guess. If you did use a regular like tomato sauce or anything like that, tomato tends to slow down the softening process in vegetables. So a lot of times you'll see in recipes that tomato comes later in the cooking. You might start with a broth and then add tomato sauce in later. That's intentional to make sure that those vegetables cook up the way that they are meant to cook up before moving on. So I think this will be my last little bit here to get to 4 cups. And then I can go ahead and stir everything together. Let's see, I'll give you a picture there of what's going on. Move everything around in the pot. It's going to be a very orange dish, I see. Your onion really almost dissolves. Same with your garlic. It really just dissolves into the flavor of what you've got going. Thankfully, there actually will be some green beans that will add some color. And I tend to continue to monitor if anything starts to feel like it's cooking too much. Just adjust your burner so that you're not getting too strong of a cook. So let's see where we're at. We've added our squash, our pears, and our chickpeas in our 3 cups of water. We're looking to bring it to a boil and then let it simmer for 10 minutes once it's come to a boil. This one probably could use, this one's already boiling. Once we've done that, we're seasoning with salt and pepper, which we've already, we're adding the green beans, and we're letting that pear get tender. That's going to be totally done. And then we add our seasonings and our mint, and we're done. So really, all we've got left is our green beans, which is a cup of green beans per. So look, the sun came out, you guys. Here we are together, and suddenly there's a beautiful sun hue. Okay, so I have a bunch of green beans over here. They are pre-washed. And this is that spot where I would say a cup of green beans is great. If it makes it to 2, not a big deal. Unless, of course, you don't like green beans in the way that I don't like squash, in which case you might want to keep it at an evener level. But green beans are wonderful. They're going to add beautiful color. Certainly, if you had some extra squash on hand, I actually have a little bit of extra kale on hand from a recipe earlier this week. Probably going to throw that in because I don't want it to go to waste, and leafy greens are so good for you. So why not go ahead and get a few in your diet whenever you can, really. So that's like almost, it's like a cup and a half, and then I'll go ahead and I'll do my double batch in this one. And honestly, the only reason I ever measure vegetables, I say this all the time, is to make sure that I get enough. Vegetables are so good for you. There are so, like if you were to use, for instance, the Weight Watchers point system, it is not the vegetables that are taking up your points. So many of the vegetables are even free, 0 points. So you can eat a ton of them. The problem is people tend to not just want to belly up to a raw plate of vegetables. That doesn't feel fun or engaging, which is why soups are so great. And if you work with the whole plant-based cookbooks, your dressing for salads ends up being like water, fruit-based. You might puree your strawberries as seasoning or utilize that lemon juice and vinegar but not add the oil. And it turns out that that is a fine workaround. It works just fine. Who knew you didn't really need the oil? The same is true. I'm putting up a pickled vegetable recipe. It's using lemon juice and vinegar. So normally people would have thought, oh, I've got to add this oil. It turns out you don't have to add that oil. It's something you can choose to do. And maybe for like 4th of July or whatever, when you're going to the big picnic, you'll add it in for that little extra fancy touch. But in your day-to-day cooking, you can skip it. It's not adding flavor to your vinaigrette per se. It's just adding moisture, which you can get. You're already getting from the vinegar, the lemon juice, or the pureed fruit. So that's my soapbox on that. We can come on over here, and we're going to add in our greenery. And our greenery. And then at the very last minute, when I am 100% satisfied that all my veggies are fork tender, meaning I can pierce them with a fork and the fork will go through, which means that you won't crunch on them when you're eating a soup. When I'm 100% sure that that's true, I'll turn off the burner and I'll add in probably a teaspoon of mint over here and 2 teaspoons of mint over here. If you were doing the fresh, I think it's 4 mint leaves thinly sliced per single batch. So there you see that adds a beautiful little bit of color, which is really helpful to have. And because this is a smaller batch, it's going to cook faster. So you want to be aware of that if you're doing double batches, that you have to give yourself a little bit more time. But that is that soup. And again, if you realized, oh, I think I need a little more beefiness to it, add some rice, some quinoa, throw it over a potato, or just dump in a few more extra beans for a little more heft. And you've got this really beautiful, jam-packed, vegetable-filled meal. It just doesn't get better than that. So I hope that's helpful. Thank you so much for being with me, and I will see you later. Bye-bye.